I think we are now live. I want to welcome everybody to another episode of what we're doing here. It's a series of discussions that we're having on Mondays and Thursdays on our Facebook channel here, our Facebook page. And we're bringing to you different conversations about how the pandemic is affecting different parts of society. And we've done a series of these. I think we've done about a dozen so far, and we've got numerous ones coming up. But I've got my buddy, attorney Greg Foster with Foster Law Firm here, and we're going to talk about nursing homes. But before we do, I want to welcome you, Greg, and say thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Bernard, thank you. I appreciate the invite and glad to be a part of this. I think it's awesome what you're doing. I mean, this is good information on all these different fronts. I mean, it's something important to people to get as much information as they can. And that's part of what I'll be talking about today is, you know, having a plan in place. And this, what you're putting out there helps people do that.
Well, I sure appreciate you making some time. And I know that one of your passions in your practice is dealing with nursing home cases. And there's been so much in the news over the last 2 months, and most of it has not been good news. But we're going to get into that in just a minute and talk about safety protocols and families dealing with their loved ones in nursing homes and those kind of things. But before we do, Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice before we dive in.
Absolutely. Bernard, I'm as you know, and others may know, I'm originally from Tuscaloosa County, from a small town, Coaling, Alabama. It's on the way to Tuscaloosa. If you're coming from Birmingham, if you've made the game day travel via the Bruno plan or whatever they call it, the game day management plan, they may have told you to get off at University Boulevard. Well, instead of taking a right, if you take a left, that's where I'm from. And it's, we used to say it's a town of about 200 to 300 people, 500 head of cattle and 35,000 chickens. I mean, it's a very small place, but it was, connected to T-Town. And so, growing up, I really didn't have any other option but to follow the Crimson Tide. And
right.
And so both via family indoctrination and just love of the game. And then, my family was very involved in those late 1970, 1980 teams. And a lot of the players came to my aunt's house and they'd whoop up on me on like in television and all those sports games, but it was just cool hanging out with those guys. And unfortunately, I never got big enough to play. I played football in high school, but got beat up pretty bad. So couldn't pursue a career like you, Bernard. I couldn't go to the next level and be a real athlete. So those dreams got quashed.
Well, you're making a difference now, Greg. I know that we've known each other for quite a while, and I love the work that you do and the passion you bring. So tell us a little bit about the Foster Law Firm and some of the casework that you do, and then we'll dive into today's topic.
Yeah, so our focus is on personal injury law. And if you looked at us, I mean, the major focus is things in the medical field. So, I mean, and if you take another step, the big thing is nursing home cases. I mean, we really focus on those, and we focus on, it's both from a medical standpoint and also a corporate standpoint. I mean, there's two different issues there with nursing homes. And, something that you're seeing more of now is more private equity companies are getting, they're investing in nursing homes. So it's becoming more of a financial play for big companies or private equity firms. And so they see it as something that they can invest in. And that's, you're seeing some of the articles come out now that may be part of the issues and part of the potentially lack of preparation that many people are talking about and bringing about right now in the nursing home context. Because, you're getting people saying, well, could we see the train coming or could we not see the train coming? And if we could see it coming, what should have been done?
Well, I want to welcome a few folks who've dropped in. Tommy Coleman, a friend of mine, Martin Weinberg, and some others. And guys, if you have questions as we go along, please throw it in the comments section. We'll make sure we get it to Greg. I'm going to put the link, Greg, to your website for your firm. So if folks want to reach out to you after the show, maybe have a case or want to discuss an issue relating to this, they certainly can. It's a clickable link for anybody who wants to reach out to Greg. But Greg, talk to us a little bit about, there's been so much news about nursing homes. I think the first thing that I read after the pandemic really was starting was the tragedy that happened out in Seattle, where so many people were diagnosed. And why is it such a concern about nursing homes these days, and what's going on and the potential dangers that may be there?
Yeah, and so there's somebody I think as a professor at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth that came out with something here in the last 7-10 days that basically said that the virus, as far as you getting it, has to do with the strength of the virus and the time that you're around the virus. Okay, and so what that professor even talked about was the fact that, look, if you're in an enclosed setting, that basically keeps the virus near you. Okay, so think about it. The best way I can think about it is like somebody smoking a cigarette. Okay, if they smoke outside, depending on how the wind's blowing and how close you are to them, you're not going to smell the smoke, or it's not going to get on your clothes or whatever. Well, you got to think about it the same way as a virus, because like that same person that's smoking outside, if they come inside and they're smoking at your den or kitchen table or whatever. Look, we all grew up, we went to somebody's house who smoked, and you know what it was like in one of those houses. And so you got to think about the virus the same way. If you're getting into an enclosed space and you're closer to somebody, you've got a larger chance of getting it, especially if somebody is, truly infected in a way that, is at a high quantity. And so what happens in these nursing homes is you brought up Kirkland, Washington. I mean, that was one of the first ones, if not the first one. And it seemed like, from what I've read, is that they had a resident that actually contracted the virus maybe at a hospital. Okay. And then they went back to the nursing home. And I don't know what they did from a protocol or policies and procedures, or if, whether or not, because the problem with this virus is it's asymptomatic to a certain degree. And that asymptomatic time period could be 3 to 4 days, 14 days. And so you can be, if you've ever spread, grass seed, you can be spreading this virus all over, and there's no real, nobody knows that you're spreading it. So that's the importance of testing. And so that's one issue in the nursing homes. And what you've seen in the news recently is like, hey, we've got to be testing these people, because this is not like somebody is physically or visibly showing that they have this. So you've got to test. But going back to Kirkland, it seemed like somebody got in there from the hospital, maybe had gotten it from the hospital, comes back to the nursing home. And then at that point, it's the old smoking example. Somebody's smoking in the house, the smoke's going everywhere. And so you've got all these residents that are in an enclosed environment, and they're soaking it up. And that's, again, I haven't dug into what they did or didn't do at that facility. But if you're letting somebody just kind of breathe the virus out, and you're not doing anything to quash it, I mean, and you got to think again about cigarette smoke. Y'all probably been to the airport and you're walking down, here in the last 10 years, they used to lock these people, and I say lock, but they put them in these little fish bowls to smoke. Everybody's seen that. And I was like, man, I'm glad I don't want to smoke, because I was afraid if I went in there, I would die instantly. Y'all have seen that. I mean, there's so much smoke in there.
Yeah.
I don't even see how that's enjoyable. And then you come out, and I mean, these people, their clothes wouldn't be colored as far as brown or gray or anything, but it was just kind of coming off of them like an old Charlie Brown cartoon.
That's right. That's right. Big
so
fan.
anyway, this in a nursing home, you've got a similar situation where that's what they try to do. If they're, they try to contain who's got it or what, and don't let it pass to somebody else. But the problem is the testing. That's why it's so important. So you can get the person to that, in that example, the smoking box,
right,
so that you can contain it.
Well, Greg, now we're 8 to 10 weeks into the pandemic, and quarantine levels or stay at home, safer at home are all different. Each state is a little bit different, but now society is slowly rolling back out, and each state again is a little bit different in what they're doing. Has there been any established national or state protocols that you're aware of for how nursing homes are dealing with the pandemic and their residents and people who want to visit their loved ones?
Yeah, they have. The CDC's put a bunch of stuff out, and Bernard, I'm happy, after we get done with this, is to send some of those links out there, however you want. I can send them to you, put them on whatever,
Sure.
respond to whatever you're putting out there. Yes, they have, and they've said, here's what you need to be doing to basically, nobody. I don't know if they've really said this. They talk about it a little bit, but to me, the way this ought to be presented is mitigate the risk. Okay. You've got to do, and it's almost like, somebody lives in the Panhandle and they've got a hurricane coming. You got two options. You can do what you can, prepare the home, put up the OSB or, super thick plywood on the windows, put some sandbags out on some, your vulnerable areas where you may take on water, and hit the road. Okay. And so that's preparing, that's mitigating the risk. Now look, hurricane hits you dead on, you've done what you can, but, generally those precautions will help mitigate the harm to your home. Well, it's the same thing here. That's what the CDC has put out is, hey, here's some things to do. If you do these, you're going to mitigate the potential for the spread of this virus and the deaths. And that's what, when people talk about this, they're trying to characterize it either in a, we can't do anything about it. It's the Black Plague and it's, so vicious and we can't stop it. And that's not true. I mean, there are things to do. There may be situations where this still, squeezes under the door and something bad happens. But if you take these precautions, which may be isolating residents, it's testing residents, it's, making sure you've got your population. Another key factor is workers in the PPE. I mean, one of the things that's just been very sad to me is that these people that are, workers in nursing homes, I mean, a lot of times they'll get in front of somebody and they don't have the proper equipment. And one of the issues that you've seen in a lot of these nursing homes is you'll have somebody that go from one facility to the next, and they've had to work multiple jobs. Mm-hmm. And so they'll go to one place and it's got a COVID-19 problem that's really not been talked about or addressed. And then they get it, go to the next facility, they're not testing. And so they walk in the door without any proper PPE. And then there's bad things that happen. So there's some steps like that can help mitigate the risk.
Well, let's put our lawyer hats on for a second for this couple of questions. And this is not as important as the safety, health, and welfare of the residents and the people who are working there. But you get a phone call, Greg, at your office, and it's somebody in nearby and says, my aunt is at that resident's home, this long-term care facility. They now they've been diagnosed positive. And there are others in the facility who are also testing positive. And I'm afraid now for her life because she's in her 80s and she's got other conditions. And the question then becomes of you or any lawyer here, is there potential liability on behalf of the nursing home should that person pass away from the condition? And we don't want to, that's the last thing we really want to think about, but it's the reality of what's going on in so many places around the country. And I don't know if there's litigation out there yet. That's not my world. So that's what I'm kind of posing to you, is to kind of talk to us from a legal standpoint. Is there liability? What can be done, if anything? So share with us a little bit of your experience about that.
Yeah, I think in a normal situation, and, just taking, pandemic out of it and taking, what we're dealing with. I mean, this is a special circumstance in that this has affected, I'm surprised if somebody told me this pandemic didn't affect their life in some way. Okay. Mm-hmm. So everybody's affected by this, and generally everybody's affected. I mean, if you're turning the dial from positive to negative, I think everybody's on the negative side of the dial. Okay. I don't think anybody's on the positive side. So that what that means is there's a lot of sympathy out there for what people are dealing with. And I've got it too. I mean, for, like I'm saying, these folks that have to go to work and they don't, local stores, you see people and they've told me that, hey, I didn't have my protective, PPE and I was scared, and you feel for that because, that's very important. What in the nursing home context, same thing. I mean, there's a lot that people are dealing with, and that's part of it. And that's definitely a huge consideration. But generally, from the legal side, there's certain things that they have to do. I mean, infection control is not a new thing.
Right.
It's, I was telling somebody the other day, the running with the bulls. Okay. It happens in Pamplona, Spain, and these enormous animals with horns are running down the street, and you got all these folks running with them. And, you got stores are all down that street, and they're there every year in July when these bulls are running, and they know they're coming. Okay. So they board up the office or the storefront or whatever, because you don't want the bull in the proverbial china shop. Okay. In Pamplona. Right. So you get this thing ready. Okay. Because the bull is coming. Okay. And so the same thing here is anybody that says, well, we didn't know the bull was coming. Well, that's not true. If you're in this area, this arena, of medicine and epidemiology and all that, once you saw this thing kick off in the fire that it had started in China, and I'm no epidemiologist, but by golly, in this world we live in now where everybody's on an airplane and everybody can get anywhere in a half second, it was just a matter of time before we were going to see some version of that here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so it's at that point, it's kind of like, what is this coming? How do we classify it? And how do we, basically mitigate the risk to our facility and protect our residents? And so that's where it gets to get back to your hurricane example. We know the hurricane's coming. We don't know how bad it's going to hit our particular place, but what can we do to prepare? And that's where it goes back to old fashioned infection control. This is a nursing home thing. We've got folks that want to say, this thing's like other things. And some folks have said, oh, it's like the flu and it's no more dangerous than the flu. The difference is probably everybody's seen. I mean, the problem here is that this thing hits so hard, so quick, it's asymptomatic. And really what you're worried about is that you don't have the medical facility to handle the inflow. Okay. So like I saw something today with Mayor Reed down in Montgomery that there's basically no ICU beds left in Montgomery as of today. Okay. That's what you want to avoid, because the next 5 people that have to go to Montgomery to go to Baptist or Jackson or one of those hospitals, there's no bed if you need to be in the ICU. And then we're over into the Italy model where they were basically having to ration care based on whether or not somebody was going to survive. I don't want that. I don't think anybody else wants that. And that's what you're trying to avoid. That's the bull that you don't want in the China shop. Yeah. And so that's what people are working toward. Now, in going back to nursing home, there's certain things that can be done. And one of the issues that everybody was kind of slow on is testing. So this is going to be a huge component of everything, is testing and the availability to get tests. And why was that so slow to ramp up? Getting back to mitigating the risk, I mean, you've got to have the tools. Like if you're going to war, you got to have bullets. Okay. If you're going to fight a virus, you got to be able to test. And so, that's going to be one of the key components to all this. But there's a little toolkit that they've got for infection control. It's like they bring out their lunch pail. It's the infection control meeting, and here's the game plan, and you employ those things. And that's what you're wanting to see a facility do in these cases. Now, what you're going to see is probably some facilities did it very well. You're going to see some facilities didn't do it because, what you're seeing in some articles right now and something that came out, this GAO report from yesterday, is these places have had infection control problems for years. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so they've been dealing with this and having problems with it and haven't really corrected the issue. So when this, they've been dealing with maybe a smaller bull, okay, and they couldn't keep that one in the pen, and now they got big Papa Bull running down the street. They're not prepared for it. And so it's kind of a preparation thing. So as far as being able to mitigate the risk, yeah, it's much harder, when you're not prepared.
Greg, have you seen any wrongful death lawsuits being filed over this?
I saw one, it was up in Kirkland, and I didn't look at the facts of it. I think generally, with this stuff, you gotta take everything into account. It's just like any case. Facts are facts, and like I'm talking about the sympathy factor. I mean, look, any case I'm gonna evaluate, I'm gonna be looking at, what were they dealing with, and it really kind of comes down to, look, and especially right now. I mean, last thing, you know, is you want to talk to a family, you want to help a family, but the big issue for me is trying, with folks I've been talking to, is let's get your family member, if they're in a facility, let's try to get them protected, and if they've got to go to some place, let's try to protect them, get them to the right place, and we can help with getting, that's one of the things that you've got to make a plan on what's the best thing to do right now. Now, God forbid they haven't passed away. Now, passed away, it's a different set of circumstances, but if they're still dealing with this virus, where can is it best for them to stay at that facility, go to another facility, go to home health? Is there something, a lot of that's going to depend on their acuity level, like how serious. I mean,
Right.
If you've got somebody that's got memory care issues, you may not can have them at home. So you're going to have to, so then it comes down to, and there's a thing out there called Nursing Home Compare. If you go to the Center for Medicaid, Medicare Services website, they'll have a little thing where you can basically break down different facilities. And that's what you'd want to do, is try to see, you want to make the best, get the best option to you, choose that rather than just making a random decision.
If you'll send me the links of these topics we're talking about, I'll make sure that we put them in the show notes. And for those of you who are watching us now or later on, I'm talking with attorney and friend Greg Foster with Foster Law Firm in the Birmingham area. Greg handles these types of matters, nursing home cases. He handles lots of medical related issues, but for today's topic, we're talking about nursing home issues during the pandemic. And Greg, I want to touch on something you mentioned very early on in our talk, is that a lot of these facilities, and I guess, first of all, let's define what these facilities are. In general terms, we call them nursing homes. But what kind of facilities are we really talking about?
Well, I mean, generally they're built, it's like an old fashioned elementary school in many respects. I mean, you kind of, if everybody remembers going to elementary school, and you got hallway going back this way and a hallway going back that way and a hallway going to the left. And you'll have residents going down both sides of the hall, and then you'll have it, broken down, maybe they call it the west wing, east wing, north wing, whatever. And then you'll have certain staff that's allocated to those particular wings. And then, depending on, going back to what we were talking about, acuity of care, depending on whether or not somebody is, do they have Alzheimer's, dementia, they may be in a different unit versus somebody that's there for just rehab. And so that's the thing you got to remember, is that some people go in and they're only there for 21 days. They're only there for what's called a rehab stay. Then there's what we call a longer term resident that may be there for a year or two. And so there's varying degrees of who's inside a nursing home, and also, not only from what they may stay, but what they're there to rehabilitate. The old days, I mean, it was totally a rehab facility where it's get somebody in, let's get them better and get them out. And, generally that's still a big part of a nursing home, but there's also these other parts where it may be, these memory care, that's a new thing as people have lived longer. You're seeing more of these memory care issues, and, with people working. See, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you wouldn't have so many people in a household working. You'd always have a couple people that were available to take care of family. That's a different dynamic now. Most people everybody in the household's working, all brothers and sisters working, multiple households. And so they're not able to take care of somebody on a daily basis. And look, even with a memory care issue, that's hard. If anybody's tried to do that, that is not easy. And so even if you are available, you still may want to get somebody involved to help. And so that's what some of the services that a nursing home may.
And these facilities
Right.
can range with their residents needing complete care all the way to being pretty independent living facilities. But we're talking for a blanket or an umbrella over the top of this is nursing homes, is what I'm calling them, or residential homes. But going back to what my comment a minute ago about your earlier statement, is a lot more of these facilities are now owned by large corporations. And what I have read, the limited exposure I've had with these types of cases, and this is my question to you, Greg, is when you're seeing that they're owned by these large corporations, does this necessarily help or hurt the residents who are there by way of the type of care, the hands-on, the policies, the procedures, are they the staffing? Does it make a difference when you see that they're locally owned versus corporate owned by a company that is 6 states away and owns 600 of these facilities? Does
Yeah,
that make a difference?
I think generally, every corporation is different. Everyone is going to have a different what they're trying to accomplish. And it's also, is it a mom and pop corporation? Is it the private equity? And so, like what you're bringing up, it seems like there's more private equity people getting into it. And so, I don't know if people remember, you're in my age demographic, maybe remember a company called KKR. Okay, it's Kohlberg, and Roberts or something like that. But they're an old kind of acquisition company, and they would kind of come in there. And what they were trying to do is basically they looked at these companies as assets, and they generally saw that they were what they would call bloated, or they could basically try to figure out a way to strip some of these, costs and make it a more profitable operation, and then try to resell it. And so that's your concern with a private equity company coming in. And look, not all of them are the same, but generally, if they're coming in, they're looking for, the old thing about private equity. And actually, I studied international finance as an undergrad, and actually have done, work in Latin America on venture capital. So this whole private equity thing is something I've looked at before. And, what they're looking for at the beginning is the exit. Okay. How do I get out of this thing? Because what it means by private equity is you don't have this in the stock market. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but the money is being raised through is private money that's being raised. So you have these investors that are putting money into this thing to try to either get it to a public offering. And so what they're trying to do, to not get too much in the weeds, is make it an asset that's sellable, that has a higher value. So if they've got, if they're giving a lot of services for free and making people feel great at a nursing home, that their bottom line may look terrible. Okay. And so they're going to have a little bit of a disincentive to really give you the luxury pampering at the nursing home, because they're trying to squeeze by with the lowest cost to make the most money. So they're trying to create this gap, and that creates the value to have a higher resale.
And as a result, sometimes if they're doing that, I would assume that maybe that some of the protocols are not necessarily being followed. The care for the patients, the residents, is not adhered to as it should. But here's the last topic I want to head to, Greg, and this is our takeaway, I think. And you've mentioned some of this, but I really want to hit home for people who are watching this, who have loved ones in these residents, these nursing home facilities. What can they do? What do they need to be proactive about to ensure that their loved ones are in the best situation if they have to stay in those facilities? What can they do to ensure that protocols or things are being done to help with the safety of their loved ones?
Well, the first thing they need to do is figure out whether or not COVID-19 is in that facility. Okay. And then they need to figure out, call the facility and say, look, what are y'all doing once somebody has this, and figure out real quick if they're testing people. A lot of facilities, even 30, 45 days ago, really jumped on the testing. They knew this, at that point, if they didn't know the bull was, coming down the street, they knew the bull was right there in their yard. And They jumped on the testing. To their credit, they, you know, were trying to address that, because you can't really know what's happening unless you're testing. I mean, you don't know where the virus is in the facility. You don't, you know, how pervasive it is. You know, cigarette smoke, you can smell it. The virus, you can't smell it. You can't see it. It's invisible until it manifests itself after that asymptomatic period. And by that time, it is too late. Okay. It has jumped lily pad to lily pad, resident to resident. So what you want to make sure is, you know, that person needs to be calling that facility today. You know, is there a COVID-19 case that's been identified? What are you doing about it? You know, are you isolating these residents? Are you reverse airflow on the circulation? Are you limiting the staff members that are treating that person? Do they have proper protective equipment? You know, what are you doing to mitigate the risk? MTR, mitigate the risk. You want to know everything they're doing to mitigate the risk. And then I'll send these CDC guidelines, and then they can check it and say, look, this is what they told me. They said they're doing A and part of B. And then the CDC says they're supposed to go A, B, C, D. Oh my goodness. And then you may, at that point, you say, well, look, what do we want to do? Do we want to switch to another facility? Do we want to try to do home health? Do we want to try to bring them home? And then that's going to, you know, I'll send you something that's from the AARP. That's a whole nother decision tree. You know, what are we going to do? Are we going to bring them, you know, and it's not an easy decision, and it's going to depend on a lot of factors. But again, your main focus is, how do I mitigate the risk? Like, look, if they're such a high risk at that facility, then I got to get them out. I got to get them somewhere. Okay, I got to do something. But if there's a way that that facility can mitigate the risk, then maybe my best option is to leave them at that particular facility. But that's a case-by-case basis.
You know, a lot of families who may not fully be informed, Greg, may not realize that, one, there should be a patient's bill of rights that they should be informed about. And two, they have options. We don't know what those are. It's a case-by-case situation, but we don't want people to feel like they're just trapped there and that eventually, you know, the worst is going to happen. So I think this is some great information from you, Greg. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your time. And I know you'll send me those links when you can, and I'll put them in the notes here in the comments so people can come back, and as they're watching, they can click on that. Greg, how can people get in touch with you? Now, again, I put the clickable link to your website, but what's a phone number? What's an address or a website or something? I mean,
yeah. So yeah, a couple things. I mean, you can text me anytime, and my cell is 205-563-3525. So if somebody wants to text, you know, call or whatever. Sometimes the text is the easiest. And then my email, and again, that's 205-563-3525. And then my email is Greg, Greg, at Foster, Foster, Law, LAW, and then NOW. So fosterlawnow.com, Greg at fosterlawnow.com. And look, and Bernard, any question, I mean, I've had a lot of people, it has nothing to do with the legal part of this. I mean, really at this point, this is more about preparing, you know, protecting people. I mean, this is more about, let's get somebody in the best situation possible. And then later on, we'll look down the road, you know, whether or not there's something that should have been done, you know, but at this point, we want to, you know, we want to know whether or not, we want to know what's going on so we can make the appropriate decision to get them in the right place today. And then later on, if somebody wants me to look at something to see whether or not there's been something that could have been prevented, we're happy to look at that too. But our major concern right now is get somebody in what I call their safe place. I mean, it's where can we get them that mitigates the most risk, that works for everybody. And that's what we try to do.
Thank you, Greg. Just invaluable information. You're a never-ending source. We could talk for hours, but we both got some stuff we got to do. So I want to thank you for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you, Bernard. And thanks for having me. And like I said, anybody needs anything, just give me a call.
We'll do. Now, guys, before we sign off in just a second, I want to let you know we're still doing a series of these. Next week, we're going to talk about the court system. I've got Josh Hayes, who is the current AAJ president's going to come on with me. We're going to talk about how people do have access to the court system and how that's working. Then the next Thursday, I'm going to be talking to a local headmaster of a school. We're going to talk about how education is changing. And I'm going to put in the show notes the upcoming list. These are all at 1 o'clock. The dates are listed on there. They're right here on the Nomberg Law Firm Facebook page, as well as my professional page. Past episodes can be found on our YouTube channel. But as always, thank you guys for your participation, your input, and your support. Please be safe. Please be patient. We're going to get through this. We are going to have college football this fall. I can feel it in some form or fashion. But y'all be well, and we'll come to you another time. Take care.